Meryl Streep walks into the bar. This is the beginning of a joke, of course. She appears flustered. She exhales loudly and then exclaims, "I need a drink. I need a drink, please." The bartender, played by Kevin Costner, grabs a can of beer, pours it into a glass, and asks, "You're okay?" "No, I'm not okay," she says. "I couldn't stand it out there. I hate thinking about this stuff. What if we've screwed it up so bad that they can't fix it? I mean, it's crazy what we're doing." Streep has just come from an Earth Day 1990 rally in which speaker after speaker has bemoaned the severity of the environmental crisis. Costner agrees with his anxious customer that the situation is really bad, even terrifying. Seeking solace, not more dispiriting words, she chides him, "I thought bartenders are supposed to make you feel better." "I can do that," Costner says, and then he describes everyday actions, most notably recycling, that individuals can take to demonstrate their environmental concern. Now, then Streep goes on to question whether these tiny and pathetic gestures can ward off the looming crisis. And Costner deflects her pessimism by emphasizing the therapeutic value of recycling. "You need to do something," he says, "instead of being afraid. You do something, you're going to start to feel better about yourself." He hands her an empty beer can, and he points to a recycling bin behind the bar. As she prepares to aim and shoot, he advises, "Take your time. Don't rush this. This could change your life." This fictional barroom exchange occurs near the end of the Earth Day special, a star-studded TV program that ABC aired during primetime on April 22nd, 1990, the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. Hailed as the largest gathering of entertainers ever to appear on a single TV program, the Earth Day special provides a particularly revealing example of the media embrace of environmentalism. Bette Midler starred as an ailing Mother Earth, who's suffering from pollution and other environmental problems. It gets better. Neil Patrick Harris, you might recall him as the star of Doogie Howser, MD, appeared as a teenage doctor who's trying to revive Mother Earth. The entire cast of Cheers, The Cosby Show, and The Golden Girls all pledge to become proper environmental citizens. And in a key moment in the special, the adorable alien E.T. shows up and provides the Earthlings with a much-needed manual on how to save the planet. Now, it would be easy to dismiss the Earth Day special as an entertaining spectacle or an empty sideshow, a meaningless distraction from the serious events of Earth Day 1990. And I'll acknowledge that the notion of Bette Midler appearing as Mother Earth or E.T. offering ecological wisdom to human beings may seem ludicrous and insipid, an easy target for ridicule. What makes the Earth Day special so telling as a cultural text, though, is how it merged so seamlessly with the larger media extravaganza of Earth Day 1990. Across a wide variety of visual and cultural fields, spectators were repeatedly urged to seek both personal therapy and a sense of political empowerment through individual action. And I will say I was tempted to give a whole paper just on the Earth Day special, and I decided not to. I'm going to give you a much more broader contextual argument about what's going on here. But at some point, if you want to hear more about the show, I'd love to tell you more about what happened. In this paper, I'm going to argue that the period surrounding Earth Day 1990 constitutes not only a crucial environmental moment, but also a pivotal phase in the emotional history of capitalism. Capitalism and emotional politics become enmeshed in new and complicated ways during this period. While corporations sometimes seem responsible for this environmental crisis, the market, spurred on by enlightened consumers, also seem to offer the most promising path out of the abyss. In an age when market metaphors became increasingly dominant in American public life, faith in personal responsibility and market-based solutions also took center stage in media framings of environmentalism. So popular visual imagery reveals the environmental effects of consumer culture, but the crisis-oriented coverage ultimately moves from corporate malfeasance to visions of individual hope and consumer-induced change. In the neoliberal age, media packaging of environmental hope often framed the movement itself as a form of therapy, a way for individuals to cope with the distressing imagery of environmental crisis. So I'm going to begin the paper by looking at how media spectacles of environmental crisis during the 80s worked to popularize environmental anxiety and also to challenge the free market fundamentalism of Ronald Reagan and the conservative resurgence. I'm going to look very quickly at a few prominent examples. I'm not going to give very close visual analysis, which is something I firmly believe in. I'm not going to do that in this paper. I'm going to move quickly through portrayals of the garbage crisis, the danger of alar-laced apples, and signs of global ecological collapse, to show how media images tempered free market ideology, but also played a crucial role in codifying what I'm describing as neoliberal templates of environmental citizenship. I'm then going to explain why this therapeutic mode became dominant during this period by connecting these images to the broader context of the end of the Cold War, the triumph of neoliberal values, and the expansion of recycling. Ultimately, I'm going to suggest that the barroom conversation between Street and Costner encapsulates the emotional dynamics and the delimited scope of environmentalism during the period surrounding Earth Day 1990. So throughout the 1980s, and especially during the latter part of the decade, environmental spectacle pushed back against free market fundamentalism. The visual media publicized a series of environmental crises that signify inherent ecological limits rather than Reaganite dreams of boundlessness. By helping mass audiences see the ecological consequences of consumer culture, and these are destructive effects that are often hidden from view, the news media mobilized feelings of environmental anxiety. So, for example, in 1987, the Mobro garbage barge set sail from Long Island, New York, looking for a place to dump its over 3,000 tons of trash. The Mobro journeyed down the Atlantic and then over to the Gulf of Mexico, only to be rejected by 6 different states and 3 foreign countries before returning to New York 2 months later. TV news broadcasts provided viewers with regular updates on the barge, which became, according to CBS, the most watched barge of garbage in the memory of man. A New Yorker cartoon captured the absurdity of the voyage. We have 2 rats standing in the front with the towering bales of trash behind them, and one of them asked the other, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think you'd one day be cruising the Gulf of Mexico? Media coverage framed the garbage crisis as a harbinger of things to come, a sign of what they describe as the looming landfill crisis, and also the need to promote recycling efforts across the U.S. While the Mobro represented the wastefulness of consumer culture, the alar scare publicized the risk to fragile ecological bodies and heightened parental anxiety, environmental anxiety, particularly among parents. In 1989, Meryl Streep, before she was so worried the next year, and talking to Kevin Costner, was the celebrity spokesperson for a campaign to ban alar, a carcinogenic chemical applied to apples. She's washing broccoli here, and I won't go into why she has broccoli in this particular scene. The campaign positioned consumers, especially children, as the prime victims and sought to mobilize parental concern, to demand that the government protect its youngest citizens from environmental harm. Alar's demise, though, came not from government action, but rather from the decision of its manufacturer, responding to public concern as well as declining apple sales, to remove it from the U.S. market. So if American consumers were victims, they also seemed, in this case at least, to be agents of change, using their purchasing decisions to alter corporate policy. So in the aftermath of the alar crisis, the news media, together with a lot of mainstream environmentalists, began to emphasize how consumers could create a healthier, more sustainable environment. One commentator would gush at the time, it's consumer power that will change the world. During this period, the media would also give increasing attention to the global dimensions of the environmental crisis. So this is a macro view of planetary peril that would present a cluster of environmental problems, ozone depletion, global warming, rainforest destruction, as transnational and interconnected. So by the late 1980s, these separate problems merged into an all-encompassing vision of global ecological danger. In January 1989, Time magazine would break from its tradition of naming an individual the man of the year and instead would place the endangered Earth on the cover as the planet of the year. As Earth Day 1990 approached, the macro and the micro, the planetary and the personal, became increasingly intertwined in media portrayals of environmentalism. More than ever before, green consumerism and other forms of personal action became the crucial levers of change, the realm in which individuals could simultaneously express their environmental values and gain a sense of therapeutic relief. In some cases, the producers of popular environmental images consciously recognized and promoted the therapeutic value of individual action. Consider the Ad Council's recycling campaign. The Ad Council is the preeminent public service advertising firm, and they developed this advertising campaign in the late 80s in conjunction with the Environmental Defense Fund, a mainstream national group. In a series of TV spots and print ads, they would use the iconic photograph of the whole Earth to visualize the global meanings of individual action. If you're not recycling, the text said, you're throwing it all away. The Ad Council developed this campaign immediately after the Mobro story had aired, and it was seen as a direct response to the environmental anxiety generated by that story. It used to be, the Ad Council said, that we rarely gave a thought to our trash after we placed it at the curb to be picked up and taken away. Now, like the sequels to a popular horror movie, our discarded waste keeps returning to haunt us. So before we had zombies, we had discarded waste coming back. To assuage this anxiety, the campaign presented recycling as an everyday form of green therapy. It's the language they use in their marketing strategy. They said that the campaign would target spectators who felt daunted by the apparent size and complexity of environmental problems. It would, quote, combat this overwhelming feeling by offering them the knowledge that they can individually have a positive impact on the environment. Audiences would learn that recycling is emotionally rewarding because it is the most direct way that they can contribute to environmental protection. So the Ad Council prescribed individual action to address consumer anxiety about the environmental future. Cultural historians have often critiqued consumer culture for what Jackson Lears, among others, described as its therapeutic ethos, for placing emphasis on self-realization through emotional fulfillment, and for leading to the devaluation of public life. Recycling, though, will be hailed for its supposed power to fuse the personal with the political and the planetary. So rather than elevating personal gratification over the public good, recycling seemed to provide a different mode of therapy, a way for consumers to merge an inner-directed sense of well-being, which is what we think of in terms of a therapeutic ethos, with an outward-looking concern about the environmental crisis. I think it's worth mentioning here that 20 years earlier, the Ad Council had famously developed the Crying Indian campaign soon after Earth Day 1970 for the anti-litter group Keep America Beautiful. And many environmentalists at that time condemned the ad for its focus on individual action. The message of people start pollution, people can stop it, would actually lead to a petition with the Federal Communications Commission in the 1970s and all kinds of protests against the Ad Council's dominance in public service advertising. Around Earth Day 1990, though, you don't see as much pushback and as much resistance to this message of individual action. So in fact, Earth Day, I argue, Earth Day 1990, makes the political appear personal and packages environmentalism more than anything else as a form of virtuous consumption. So my question is, why did this particular vision of environmentalism as an individualized form of therapeutic politics become so widely represented and enshrined in this particular historical moment? And I'd argue that there are three reasons that stand out. First, the end of the Cold War, together with the success of the Allard campaign and other green consumers projects, all reinforced the popular faith in the capitalist market as an instrument of democracy. And it's helpful here, I think, to widen our view, to place these environmental images within the broader visual landscape, to connect Earth Day 1990 to other major news events of the time. So the period surrounding Earth Day 1990 would not only lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union, but would also reveal haunting visual evidence of pollution throughout the Eastern Bloc. So here we see a photograph of Kopsanica, Romania, which would be dubbed by Time magazine as the blackest town in the world. Images of this polluted landscape circulated widely in the days and weeks immediately preceding and following Earth Day 1990 on TV news and popular magazines. These kinds of images were very widely circulated. To many American viewers, this imagery confirmed the inherent superiority of U.S. capitalist democracy, and I think contributed to the widespread belief in what Francis Fukuyama would famously and exuberantly call the end of history. Meanwhile, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the iconic image of the lone Chinese protester at Tiananmen Square would galvanize popular hopes in the capacity of people to change the world. Like the Tiananmen Square photograph, Earth Day 1990 events and green consumerism would all zero in on the individual as the ultimate agent of change. Second, the visual politics of Earth Day 90 lunge between the global and the personal to create a contradictory politics of scale. So at the macro level, the environmental crisis seemed both worldwide and potentially apocalyptic. Just as Time placed the endangered Earth on the cover, or Bette Midler's Florida's Inhaling Mother Earth, other popular images, including the official logo of Earth Day 1990, would express a global vision of environmental crisis. These texts would present a sense of universal vulnerability, but they would also obscure power relations and environmental inequities, both within the U.S. and on a global scale. So even as minority communities struggled against environmental racism in the U.S., and even as the U.S. increased its export of toxic waste to the developing world, these images presented all humanity as linked by a common, equally shared geography of risk. The global sense of crisis would also be joined by a relentless focus on the micro, on the individual as an agent of change, the enlightened consumer who can redirect markets and ensure sustainability. So from ecological systems in peril to choice-making individuals saving the planet, media framings of Earth Day would apply micro-solutions to a macro crisis. Neoliberal models of citizenship, I think, help mediate this apparent contradiction between planetary crisis and personalized solution. The neoliberal emphasis upon individual responsibility as a marker of citizenship. Imagine environmental citizens saving the Earth by governing at a distance. And finally, the rise of recycling programs provided a tangible way for individuals to gain a sense of involvement in the environmental cause. It's not coincidental that recycling, above all other actions, became the most prescribed form of action during this period. While modern recycling had emerged as a countercultural practice in the 60s and 70s, the mainstreaming of recycling would not happen until the late 80s and early 90s, as beverage and package companies, together with local, state, and federal government agencies, began to tout it as the panacea to the nation's solid waste crisis. The recycling logo, which incidentally emerged after Earth Day 1970, suddenly became ubiquitous, appearing on bins and beverage containers as an emblem of sustainability. So we return to Meryl Streep. After she tosses her beer can in the recycling bin, it was a perfect shot, Kevin Costner asks her, "Do you feel better?" "I do," she says, and then with a flirtatious giggle adds, "But I'm not sure it has anything to do with the environmental movement." Rather than continuing in this banter, though, they conclude with solid recognition of their duty to act as proper environmental citizens. So just as Costner tried to make Streep feel better by showing her where to toss a beer can, the media spectacle of Earth Day would imagine environmentalism to be constituted by individual actors making voluntary choices that would simultaneously protect the environment and soothe their anxiety. Rather than a sharp break from Reaganism, Earth Day instead smoothed the transition to a green vision of neoliberal citizenship. In the Ad Council recycling campaign, in Costner's advice to Streep, and in other depictions of recycling as therapy, the emphasis upon personal responsibility altered the emotional life of capitalism by promising that the environmental future could be secured through enlightened consumption. So as green went mainstream, environmental anxiety became embedded within American consumer culture. Even as media imagery would render visible the destructive effects of consumer capitalism, and thereby implicitly critique free market fundamentalism, green consumerism would position individuals as the prime agents of change. Environmental anxiety often depended upon a vision of citizens in need of protection from the market, but now the therapeutic frame reimagined consumers as empowered players in the market. During the period surrounding Earth Day 1990, the media offered ample evidence of capitalism's destruction of the ecosphere, but it also provided emotionally satisfying ways for consumers to soothe their anxiety and gain feelings of environmental hope. Thank you.